Hello, everyone. This is Ed Brenegar, and today I want to introduce to you a new facet of the Eddie Network podcast. And this is the Eddie Network Africa podcast. And the interview today is with a young man that I've known for about 3 years, over 3 years now. And then there'll be another Africa interview later this week. And then there'll be a time of kind of dormancy while we prepare for the publication of my book, Circle of Impact Africa. And when that book is released, then I'll bring more interviews of people, some of those who will have had an impact on the book itself, and you'll get a feel for what Africa is about. I mean, there's a lot of information that is distributed in the West about Africa, but it all comes through the typical mainstream media sources, and so I think it's not as accurate as maybe people might think it is. So I'm interested in talking to African people and let them tell their own African stories, and without a Western filter. Even though I'm a Westerner, even though I'm an American, I really want them to tell their story, and the people I know, I think, really have something to say to us. So this is what's coming. The Eddie Network Global will continue as normal. We'll be moving into a once a week mode in March, and then sometimes later this year we'll begin the Eddie Network Local, where in conjunction with a local radio station, we'll be doing interviews just in that community, and that radio station will be sponsoring what we're doing in terms of the interviews we do for that community. So I think it's going to be a variety of things that we're doing with the podcast, which I think you will find interesting and worthwhile listening. And I appreciate you doing that. So without further ado, let's go to the first episode of the Eddie Network Africa podcast. Hello, everyone. This is Ed Brenegar. It's good to see you today. And I want to introduce you to my friend, Tony Wachira. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes, you did, Ed. Yes, you did.
I'm really conscious of not mispronouncing people's names. And it's, in this very global world where you meet people from all over the world, it's easy to mispronounce names. So I'm glad I got your name
True.
right. Tony's a friend of mine from Nairobi, Kenya, and we've done some work together, and we are the product of a networking venture with a friend of mine through a friend of his who was a friend of his mother, who connected us together back in December of 2019. And we had a chance to meet while I was in Nairobi during that time. And I think we realized that we have a lot of things in common, in that we want to do things together for the benefit of people everywhere, but in particular, the benefit of people there in Kenya. So welcome, Tony. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and how, what is it that you do? How do you describe yourself? And how did you get there?
Thank you very much, Ed, and thank you too, because I hear you consider me a good friend of yours, just like I consider you. So I want to begin by appreciating that.
Yeah.
And then I'll get to what it is that I do. Karibu. Not too shabby, Ed. Not too shabby. All right. So, okay. So I lead with that I am a transitions coach. I'm a certified coach, and I love coaching people who are going through different transitions in their lives and in their careers. But besides that, I am also a leadership and communications and culture change training facilitator. And of course, I'm a husband and a father. I have a daughter who is turning 13 this November. So that's the abridged version of what I do. Yes.
And how did you end up being a transitions coach?
I love that question. I was I worked in one company for about 12 years, and I didn't like it there. I didn't feel like I had the impact that I thought I should have. And I tried to grow or to change roles. I tried a couple of things, and it didn't feel like it was working. I tried everything I knew how to try, and things didn't work out. So I transitioned out of that, and it was a multinational. I opted to join a startup, and I took a 1 year contract, which was a strange decision for a person approaching middle age who has a family, who is leaving the security of a job that has got all the trappings of a multinational could give you health insurance. It's got some money for retirement and so on and so forth. So I moved to what most would consider a smaller company. It was a smaller company. And while I was there, I kind of started finding myself because I was doing what I felt equipped to do. I was in logistics, and the new company I was joining was doing training, which was my passion, and I was unable to do that in the other organization. Unfortunately for me, in that organization, I didn't stay too long because I was laid off because we had financial trouble somewhere along the way. And the turn of me now being laid off is when I was convinced that I should branch off on my own and start a business where I am doing training. By that time, I was already a certified trainer, and so began the journey of me becoming a training facilitator. And along that curve, I also became a certified coach. Yeah.
How how common is it for men and women in your age grouping there in Nairobi to go out and start a new business like that?
Hmm. I think it's a mixed bag. I know a couple of people who've done the same, though there are some things that they have to consider. Some of them, so it's in the minority. I would say it's in the minority because the security at that age, when you are thinking about family and future, you want what is familiar. So a lot of people would settle for what is familiar, what is safer, what is secure, and they will give up the adventure of getting out there and learning something new and creating something new, and in the process creating even greater impact. And I'm talking from experience. The impact that I had while I was an employee and I worked for great organizations compared to the one that I have been able to have when I branched off and started a business is incomparable. I have been able to influence younger people even more, and I have a passion for those people. And I've been able to reach further than ever because of doing this. So I think a lot of people fear the unknown because of all the you are trading comfort, you're trading almost a schedule, and you're trading regular income for what, quote unquote, an adventure. And it seems like a crazy thing to do because even a lot of my friends warned me, a lot of them told me that it's a bad decision. A lot of them they could only see the negative side of what I was doing. They failed to see what could be.
Yeah.
And that's, I think a lot of them fail to see what could be. So there's a small group of people who are adventurous enough to try. And in my experience, some people have to watch someone else because I dare say this: there are friends of mine who've come up to me and told me that I gave them the courage to step out because they had hit a glass ceiling, they were not growing anymore, their impact had stopped at some point, but they were not sure what to do next. But after observing someone else who has done it and your quality of life seems to be improving, you look more positive, you look more happier, you have greater impact, they are more convinced that it's something they can do.
So, who did you who did you seek to imitate in being this person?
That's a good question, Ed. I'll I'll be very honest. I'm not sure there was anyone to imitate. I At that point, I had no role models to emulate at that point. I just looked for a teammate. I looked for a support system, someone who would who knew my journey well enough to who I would bounce off these crazy ideas that I want to move from a multinational to a smaller business, and eventually, when I was laid off, that I don't want to look for a job now. I want to start a business. Someone who had followed my career well enough, who was my wife, and also another older man who's my best man. So the two and his wife. So those two places were sort of the support system I had at the time, because they're the ones who agreed with me at every inch of the way. They supported me. Besides them, it was like the whole world against that team. Nobody else could see the sense in any of these decisions that I was making.
I think this is very true for a lot of people, and this is true for me. I mean, that I really didn't see people who were when I started this. There weren't people doing the kind of stepping away from a secure position, a secure future, a secure career, and I mean, there were people, they were doing it, but they were unique, and a lot of them were in the technology arena here in the U.S. But when I stepped out and started my consulting practice in 1995, I'd never run a business and never been a consultant. I mean, it's jumping off the deep end like you. I mean, it's and yet, and I think this is the key. I mean, this is the key to how we met. And if you build the relationships with people, you will figure out how to make it work. And so I want the audience to hear about what you did for me. So when I returned to Kenya in late January of 2020, the first day I was back, you and I had planned to have lunch, and I came to lunch. Yes. You brought your friend Paul Dalizu to come with me. So now you are networking me to Paul, and in network science terminology, there was a structural hole between Paul and I, and you brokered a relationship with us, and you closed that. You brought closure, and you brought that closure to the relationship so that we could generate what is called social capital. So Paul, if you remember at that lunch, Paul said, "So what do you want to do while you're here?" He said, "Would you like to speak?" I said, "Sure, I'll be glad to speak." Well, he ended up putting together, I think, 7 events for me to speak. I mean, he did that in I was only there 3 weeks. So he did that. And it was a remarkable experience, and it really solidified my sense of what is true about Africa, which is that it's this great place, and it's going through lots of change, and the people there are very excited about growth. So that's what it excites me about knowing you.
Thank you. So I remember that lunch too. Amazing time. Keep going.
So I'd like us to talk about something we have discussed before, and if the pandemic hadn't happened, we would have ended up taking a trip together. And there's So I'd like us to talk about Marsabit, and I'm sure that very few people that are listening or watching this program today have any idea where Marsabit is. So kind of describe where it is, kind of describe what this place is, and what you see as what's the story about Marsabit that was compelling to you, and why you told me about it and made me interested in it.
Yes. I remember we were supposed to go there, and in fact, actually, just this week I was speaking to the leader of that project over there. But let me explain about Marsabit to our audience.
Yeah.
So Marsabit is in the northern part of Kenya, and it is arid and semi-arid. It has one of the deserts in Kenya, and then most of the other part is semi-desert. So it's really, really dry. And the particular place where you and I were supposed to go is even more remote. It's called Kor, and the people that live there are called the Rendile. The Rendile are they feel like they are not in Kenya. In fact, when I have a call with my friend, the gentleman who runs that project up in Kor Marsabit, he talks about Kenya 1 and Kenya 2. That's a joke between me and him. He normally asks me, how is Kenya? Because they are very, very remote. In our view, as most Kenyans, they have been neglected by successive governments because they don't have water, they don't have electricity, they don't have those things, and they are in the desert, which are pretty important things for them. They don't have good schools, they don't have good roads. In fact, as far as I know, I've not been there post-pandemic. The road that passes through the town actually was made because it was going to Ethiopia. The good road that now passes through the town of Marsabit. So it looks like it was a by the way. It was not really their project. It was a state project to connect Kenya and Ethiopia, and it had to pass through there. Anyway, so what excites me about that project is how local people have been able to empower their local community, led by this friend of mine. His name is David. David is a Rendile, and he grew up in that area and was educated through the help of missionaries. They came and established a school, and he got to go to school because he was the last born. That place is steeped in tradition, and his elder brothers and sisters had to do the traditional thing. They had to take their pastoralists. I don't know if that word is makes sense in the US. They are nomads. They they move with the animals from place to place. So he was lucky because he was the youngest and he got to go to school. Then he had this burning desire to go back home and help his people. So he has a master's degree, and his mindset is very different. So he went back there and took over the leadership from the missionaries, and he has done great work. He has raised money. He's raised over 20 million Kenya shillings. That would be over 200,000 US dollars, and built modern schools. They are the best schools in the area. So the area is traditionally Muslim, and people who practice traditional religions. And he being a Christian, so they have a mission there. Whatever they run there is a Christian mission. The project is a Christian mission. So they have the best schools, then they have provided water for the community. They've dug boreholes, and they provide water for the community at a very affordable price, so that the community can afford it, and the mission can raise some funds to keep it running, so that they're not entirely dependent on missionary support or support from the West, because most of the money that he raised, he got from the US and the UK, I believe. Then because the Rendile, like I told you, they are pretty neglected. They are very illiterate. They didn't know how to read and write in their own language. So this mission has trained them how to read and write in their mother tongue, an adult literacy program, so that they can read and write, and they can learn to read the Bible for themselves, of course, being a Christian mission. And then last week, when we spoke this week, he told me that after they learned how to read and write in Rendile, they are now teaching them how to read and write in our national language, Kiswahili. So there has actually been improvement since I was there. They have grown enough to learn 2 languages. These are people who could not read or write in their mother tongue. So those are some of the things that I have observed that have been, and they have had a profound effect on the people around there. And this man, because like I said, his thinking is very different. He even saves his own water, recycles his own water in the middle of the desert, and uses that to make a kitchen garden and grow his vegetables, so that he can show them practically that you can actually grow something in this desert. He's been able to grow vegetables. I think there's a time he even grew watermelon. So he's been able to do a bit of agriculture in the desert as a practical way of challenging his people to embrace a different way of living, because they are not farmers. A lot of them do not even want to live in modern housing. So they still those traditional housing. We call them manyatas. But he has led the way practically. And because he lives among his people, he's leading the way to bring a mindset shift in the place. Yeah.
That's fascinating. Obviously, people hearing you tell that story can see why it would be interesting to go up there. I mean, because what we're seeing is, and I'm not using these words in any way a pejorative way, but what the Rendille were, the culture that they were living in was a very primitive culture. It wasn't a modern culture. It wasn't a modern Western culture. You know, it wasn't a culture where people were working to acquire money and put money into a bank. You know, it's very subsistence level of living. You know, and they lived off what they could find and do every day. I suspect, and that when I think the thing about literacy is important. So when the literacy in the schools came about, then that began to change that culture. And what I hear also in what you're saying is that these people were not dumb, they were not stupid, they were not unintelligent. That they had the capacity to learn two languages, to learn to read languages at the same time. I don't know if I ever really had that capacity. I mean, I've taken languages and none of it stuck, you know, because I have one language, you know, I know English, that's it. So I'm impressed with what I'm impressed by the fact that that this kind of cultural change is possible in situations where nobody thinks it is. And so tell us a little bit about your little project that you did there in Nairobi to support them up there.
Thank you. So the time that I had gone up there, I had been invited to go do some training, some capacity development for his team. And while up there, and again, he had been able to raise funds specifically for that locally, which is amazing because he's got local partners who are able to support things like that. And while I was there, I stayed an extra 2 days to tour the place, just to enjoy myself, because it was my first time. I'm Kenyan, and we hardly find ourselves going up north in our country. It's remote unless you're touring, unless you are going to have fun. We don't go there much. So it was my first time. So just like you're amazed at their capacity to learn, I was amazed because I didn't know that there were such smart people up there. So in my interactions with them, I went to their projects, the schools. I was shown around, and I noticed that their library had no books. The high school library, it had very few books. So I committed to them that when I come back to Nairobi, I'm going to mobilize my friends and have them help me collect books, and we would equip the library. So coming back to Nairobi, I put out a post on LinkedIn, and I explained to them. I actually used a true story, which I've never told you about, by the way, Ed. So they had this exam question. Yeah, they had an examination question. I think it was a national exam that was asking the children to. The question went like this: if you're about to cross a road and the lights you are at a place with traffic lights, when should you cross? And the choices were when the light is red, green, orange, or you just cross. And all the kids in that area just said, you just go right ahead and cross, because they have never seen any traffic lights there. There are no roads to begin with. So where would they even see it? Would they see traffic lights? So that story made me really sad. It was funny and they laugh about it, but it was sad for me. And that's when I thought they really need to see the world in books, because that's how I started experiencing the world myself, by reading books and learning about the world. So seeing that their library had no books, I made that commitment, wrote a story on LinkedIn telling them that that's what happened there, my friends, and that we need to equip those kids with books so that they can see their world through books before they experience it. And while there, I actually got a chance to speak to the kids, and I shared, I can't remember exactly what I talked about, but I talked about dreaming and thinking big. So we collected books and we were able to equip that library. I was able to get my friends to donate old books. Some of them donated money, and we went out and bought a lot of books, and we were able to equip the library, and we were so pleased with that.
That's fantastic. I'm glad to hear that. And that little story about the traffic light really is indicative of the difference between a modern culture and a primitive culture. And and you know, I don't really you know, I think it's important for people to learn how to read. I think literacy is important, but I think also it shouldn't destroy the quality of the culture that they already have at the same time, because there are things about their culture, and you know, I've seen this in other places where they're primitive, I would call primitive people, that they have something to offer to the world that the world doesn't recognize as being valuable at this point, but I see it as valuable. And you know, they're far more connected to the land, far more connected to nature. You know, they're not avaricious. You know, it's all these different virtues that come when you don't have a lot of stuff, and so you have to live a different way. So I think it's a great story.
Yeah.
So I'd like to shift our conversation to talking about local communities, and this is something you and I have talked about before, and you know, we're both concerned about healthy communities, and your work as a transitions coach, you know, it touches on the transitions that people do and go through, and families go through, and businesses go through, but also communities go through transitions. So let's talk about this, and I'm interested in what how you define what a healthy community looks like. What are some of the I know you have some principles that you like to speak about. So tell me some of those principles that and for our audience, I want you to hear that here's an African man who has something to say to us who are in the West, and I just want to make that point. And I value his perspective, because I think he sees things, and many of my African associates see things that we can't see where we live, and I think it's really valuable. So thank you, Tony, for your insight. And so I want to hear it. So
okay, thank you for that question, Ed. So in my view, a healthy community is a community where the members have learned to participate. As simple as that sounds, they have learned to participate in their community, because no man is an island, and the problems that they face affect the whole community. So at the very, very least, I think people need to learn to participate. And when they learn to participate, you know, everybody is encouraged and motivated to do something about the community. That for me is where the community begins, because we have the same problems, we have the same needs, we are affected by the same issues. So I believe that a good, healthy community has collaboration. People learn how to work together because everybody is participating. And then we share values. So we believe certain things. We believe the values that we share are the ones that are causing us to work together as a cohesive unit. And then we have a compelling need, a bigger vision. It may be led by one person who has shared it with us that that's the way. And if I would go back to the Marsabit story, where this local person who grew up there, who knows the challenges that they went through, comes back to lead the mission that is helping his people. So he has a vision of a more vibrant, a greater mindset for his people. So he leads them, but he helps them to see it. So they all are galvanized around that big vision. So they share the same values. And what am I leaving out? Yes, and I think in a strange sense, the community should also be able to measure their impact. How are we doing towards the vision that we have cast for ourselves? So shared values, a sense of collaboration where people are participating, and a compelling need, a bigger need, a vision. That for me makes a healthy community.
Okay, let's take those and do some deep dive into those, and let's talk about. So, let's talk about. So, how does a community discover what values that they actually share? How does that happen? Because I think it's a difficult. I mean, it depends on how isolated the community is. But let's say if it's a community that's there on the outskirts of Nairobi, or on the outskirts of Kigali, or Kampala, or anywhere there in Africa, a small. I mean, these are the communities that I've been in, and and so in my perception is that there's situations are very much like situations here. You have a lot of media that is kind of presenting a perspective or a perception of the world that people adopt and say, oh, well, that's what we're supposed to be like. But oftentimes that doesn't end up resonating in a way that the people come together and share a set of values. So the question is, how do you take a community and help the people discover the shared values that they have?
All right. I will pick a community like in the outskirts of Nairobi, and I'll say what I have seen and what has worked here. The successful communities will adopt modern ways of doing things, but not completely discard our African ways. And in a country like Kenya, and in a city where you have a city like Nairobi, we don't carry our entire tribal values with us. We take national values. So there are national values that have been taught to us through the schooling system, that have been taught to us through something like our national anthem, like our loyalty pledge. And when we look at our country and see what corruption has done, and especially in those communities that need a mindset shift, you can weave through those and find values that can help people have number one, a mindset shift, and number two, some form of independence from not to depend on government to come and do everything for them, because they are in this problem because government has not done those things. So you can find values that unite these communities and that can help them come out of the issues that they are struggling with. And I found that in the areas of Nairobi in particular that are less fortunate. We have a lot of slums in Nairobi, and we have a lot of small communities in there that have found a bigger purpose and have been able to start small businesses, like they collect trash and they make money out of that because the place has a lot of trash. They decide that our job will be to clean this up. And they start cleaning that up, and they figure out how to make money out of that, and they make a better life for the community, and at the same time they have a job and they're making some money. I know some people from a church I used to attend that was near a slum, and the church allowed. I think the church, the men came together and bought some equipment for the young people, a container that was partitioned for these young people to start a business, and they have done a business next to the church. So a lot of their customers are coming from the church because they're supporting them. Yeah. So if you can show them the need, if you can show them the opposite of the poor values that they have been shown by some of their leaders, because the corruption is because of poor leadership. The leadership that is supposed to provide sanitation, that is supposed to provide water or safe water, that is supposed to provide good roads and safe drinking, hospitals for the community. It has failed in this place, and we cannot depend on them. We have to start doing some things for ourselves. So it begins with a mindset shift, and as long as you can galvanize them around values that will help them and the community, you can find shared value there.
You know, this reminds me of situation that I encountered the first summer of the pandemic, and there were a couple of pastors in Uganda who reached out to me, and their situation there was really quite bad. And they said, our people are starving. Our people don't have food. They don't have access to food because the lockdowns made it very difficult for people to move around, and because in many of these, I mean, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but in many of these communities, people buy the food that they're going to have for that day on that day.
Yep.
They're not storing food.
That's true.
They go to the market and they'll buy some vegetables, and they'll take some fruits. They'll get some grains, and they'll go home and make it, and that'll be their meal. And so they were not able to do that, and they were telling me of people within their communities that were dying because they were starving. And I said to them, well, I said to one of them, his name is Emmanuel. I said, Emmanuel, why don't you contact your local elected official and tell him your story, and say, if you get me the food, I'll distribute it. We'll distribute it. And that's what happened.
Yeah.
So so that, I thought that was a great situation. But the problem was, it was a one-off situation. It just happened one time, and that's it. So then, this is how a local community functions. Then he went out and he leased some land, and he and some of the men from his church went and seeded it with maize, and they grew maize so that they could feed the people in their community, 3 or 4 months later. And and that project was going to move to another level, but the funding for it never came through, so they were not able to do what they wanted to do. So that, so there's this principle, and we have talked about this, that I believe in African organizations with African leadership with African money, and that's part of what I think, when we recognize the need in a local community, that's part of what we need to be doing, is figuring out how this community can raise the funds to take care of it as a community.
Totally agree. And I really love that concept, and that's one of the reasons why I resonate with you so much. And I think that they should begin small, and like just like I was saying about people getting to participate, they should not leave the burden of finding the funding to one person. They could all have participated in one way, and if everybody, even if they were to go to that elective official and tell them, we have leased this land, we have raised enough money to lease it for 2 years, but we want you to lease to add us a bit more money to lease it for 4. That way we will have cultivated and fed the community and sold. We will get to a place where we are independent. They can become a farming community with that much land. I don't know how much land it was, but it's something that can be done with a bit more participation.
So if you and I were kind of co-consultants going and talking to a community, and you would have said, well,
yeah,
you need to get your people to participate. And I would follow that and say, well, you also need to get your people to contribute. They need to
yes,
contribute out of whatever little bit they have. Even if it's
mm-hmm.
one Kenyan shilling, that's a contribution which says, I am doing something for my community.
I love that. And that's the same thing I was saying, that if they come and tell the elected official that we have been able, with our own little money, we have listed for 2 years, because there's this thing on this side in our country, when people don't pay for something, there's not much commitment. And if they want to commit to this for the long haul, then they also need to put some money into it, however little. They need to put some money there, and then they will be able to commit to it even when someone else says, okay, I'll add you a year. But they had their own money in there. That shows commitment, and it motivates them to stay and to give their best.
I when I was there in February 2020, I went up to Eldoret to be with the people at Empowering Lives International. And for our listeners and watchers, they're a mission organization out of Southern California that does rural economic development, among other things. And they took me out into, I would call it the bush, but I don't think it's actually the bush. This took me out into this rural area outside of Turbo, and it was a very African experience, because it was a moment where they honored me by having these women come meet with me to tell me their story about learning how to farm, beginning with one chicken.
Mm-hmm.
And the interview that I did with these women can be found on my YouTube channel. So I'll just say that in the notes you can find the link. But one of the things that impressed me, and I want to hear what you think about this. One of the women said, we can now make money. We can start with one chicken, and we can have eggs to eat, and then we can have more chickens to have more eggs. And over the course of a year, we'll have eggs to eat and chickens to eat, but also eggs to sell and chickens to sell. And they were raising money. And one of the women, it was just brilliant how savvy she was about economics. He says, and if we do this, we can save money so that when we become old and we don't have the energy to take care of the chickens, we'll have money to live on. And I thought,
yes,
that's a really fantastic understanding of what actually a community is about. And they talked about being self-sufficient and interdependent. So would you talk some about how those two ideas are really important in how a local community can develop?
Definitely, Ed. I love that story very much. And for me, one of the things that I like encouraging people in my practice is self-leadership, to lead self before you can even lead others. And what I see in that story is people who understand their situation very well and who are thinking beyond now, and who are thinking beyond now and into the future. And I think before you can be interdependent, you have to be independent. You understand yourself fairly enough. You understand your strengths, and that in this situation I can contribute in this way. Sometimes I use the word sphere of influence. I believe everybody has a sphere of influence that they can influence. So I got this strengths, and I bring them, and you have your strengths in this community, and you bring them, and we combine that and that's the interdependence. So you are this one has got a good economic outlook. There are others who are more operational in the community, so they can look at the chickens and see when the chickens need medication, because chicken do need a bit of care. And in our country, there are seasons when there is some chicken diseases that can wipe out your entire flock. So you need people who can keep an eye on that. You need people who can look for the market for the eggs. So the community, all those different skills can be represented, and they can help build a bigger, more robust community for these women, as opposed to if I had my own few chicken and I I just know how to take care of chicken, and maybe they lay a lot of eggs, and I don't sell them, I just eat them. So the economic one helps us to think about how to sell. Then, because it's a local community, you don't need Facebook to do marketing. Maybe you don't, especially being in the countryside. You need to know your local people. So somebody knows their local people, the local shops, the local homes. So that one is possibly the person that they would use now to spread the word and do deliveries, because the way it works in the countryside, you may not even need to hire. We use bikes a lot here to do a lot of deliveries. You may not even need to hire a bike. It's so relational. They can carry the trays themselves. I'll deliver to so and so as I'm passing by their house, and it becomes a system that works. And of course, when it grows and becomes bigger, they may automate it a little bit. But I see, if first you become independent because you are building your strengths, you are building your participation. Then we bring those strengths together and we create a system of people who are interdependent and working in their strengths.
And I think this is important for people to understand that this approach to community building and community development and human development is ongoing all across Africa. And I know it's an amazing thing to have people reach out to me and tell me their stories about how, I mean, many of them have heard me speak about Circle of Impact, my model of leadership. And they write back to say how important it was to them, because they found, in a sense, an affirmation of of the strengths they have to offer, but they also gain from that a vision for impact. So here's where I'd like, we've been kind of focused on local communities, but now I'd like to kind of end our conversation by talking about Africa as a whole. And I think it's a fascinating place, and it's not one thing, it's very many things. And I was told earlier this year that 70% of the population of Africa is under the age of 30. Now, to me, that sounds like a opportunity-rich environment to do leadership development. So what do you think about this? What do you think is think about that? But more importantly, what do you think is the future of Africa in terms of its young people?
First of all, I agree with you about the huge potential, and I have a passion for these young people myself. So this is a topic that is very close to my heart. I believe that the opportunity we have now is to encourage as many people as possible to start mentoring the young people, because our young people are more westernized than any other generational cohort. So you find that they like gaming. You find that they have smartphones and they are on those gadgets for a very long time. And because of the disparity, because they are grandparents and my age mates, so those two generations before them, we didn't grow up the same way, and there's quite a bit of conflict. And in fact, in some of my work, I try to address the issue that has been called the quarter life crisis, the one that affects the people in their 20s, because they're coming out of school and struggling to understand the workplace. The workplace is led by their grandparents and their parents. So it looks and feels quite a lot like the ones who lead it. And they're coming out with ideas, with a different thought of how things should be. And when they get into the workplace, the older generation is complaining that they do not know how to work. They are not ready for the workplace. There's a huge, huge conflict. So my challenge to the older is to mentor them and to have some empathy and compassion to try and understand that this cohort is coming from a very different place. But at the same time, because I also speak to the young people, I tell them to also read their room, to understand the dynamic that they are coming into a place that is owned by someone else. And if they are starting a business, the people who have the money are the older people. So if the business is targeting those, you have to understand them. So there's an interesting um, scenario here. The young people have got to step it up a little bit to understand the older, and the older have got to have empathy and compassion to mentor them, because like you rightly put it, I see a huge potential, I see a huge opportunity, and they are exposed to a lot of knowledge. They're also exposed to a lot of new ways of generating money, things that were not making money 20 years ago, like content creation on YouTube and TikTok, things. And I mean, a lot of it, it's a big deal in the US. It's become a big deal here in Africa. People are actually starting, they are calling themselves content creators, and they're actually earning a living doing that. So we need to get it right in terms of that division, because we also don't want them to get lost in not understanding, uh, not seeing the longer, not having a longer term vision, especially because I know I've talked, maybe I've gone windy, but I've remembered something that I had forgotten. There's a there's a there's a way in which a lot of young people in Africa are disenfranchised, and they feel it because largely due to the corruption. Corruption has favored the people with the money around here who are the older. So there's actually a saying in Kiswahili in my country that says, kazi kwa wazee, kazi kwa vijana, pesa kwa wazee, which means the work is going to the young people, but the money is going to the older. It's just a street thing, because they're given work, even by government projects, but the people who are making most of the money are the guys who are giving them the work, even in the government projects. So they'll be told, do this, you'll be paid this amount of money. But whatever those guys write in their records is way more than what they are paying them. So they are enriching themselves at the expense of these young people, so at the expense of the young people. So there's a bit of disenfranchisement, and we are getting it wrong there, because this is the future.
Yeah.
And they have all these ideas, and they have all this creativity and things that they can teach us that can actually even help us and our businesses. So I think that we are the ones. It's the older people who need to reach out and start mentoring these younger people.
So you really are talking about the need for intergenerational relationships where older people mentor younger people and younger people mentor older people. I mean, I think it goes both ways.
Correct.
Yeah. And you know, and I'm kind of announcing to the audience that my Circle of Impact book has been reworked, and it's coming out in Africa, called Circle of Impact Africa. And in it, I've changed the stories, and one of the stories in there is about a grandfather who worked for an English merchant during the colonial era there in Kenya, and they would go around to the tribes and they would buy tribal arts and tribal goods, and people from around the world would come to them and buy. And when the colonial era ended, this former military guy who ran this business gave the business to this Kenyan man who worked for him, and so he developed his business, and then and he had and then, you know, decades later, he's probably close to the time when he would quit, but he's not going to quit. His grandson comes into the business. His grandson helps him understand how the world has changed and how there were people who are creating knockoff products of African tribal arts, and so, you know, it's a I enjoyed writing this story because it really is kind of this composite of this large picture of what's happening not just in Africa but in the whole world, and mm-hmm. it's exactly what you were talking about. So that's a good thing. So tell me, are you hopeful for the future?
Definitely, I am hopeful. I am very hopeful despite the setbacks. I have seen young people who don't fit the mold. I am a champion for the young people. I believe that they didn't bring up themselves. I always challenge whenever I'm in a group of my age mates and my elders who are complaining about these young people. I always remind them that they did not bring themselves up. And I have found literature dating back to even 500 BC. There's some quotes that are attributed to Plato complaining about young people. So it is amazing to see this this bias has been there for a long time. Yeah. So there are some young people who are refusing to fit the mold. They are hardworking, they are respectful, they are all the things that you would use to describe a boomer, very disciplined, very focused. And they give hope that even in the cases where there is lacking mentorship, there's a parent or there's someone who invested in this young person for them to turn out the way they're turning out. So those ones give me hope. There is also programs that I am involved in that target young people, and we encourage them to ask questions. We encourage them to be as open as possible and to be creative. And so it gives me hope. And I see a lot of my age mates in particular holding programs, especially when schools are out. They're trying to get to the young people as early as in their teens to get them to start thinking about their future, to get them to start thinking about even in that very young age about what they want to do with their lives.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm very optimistic.
So if someone wanted to talk with you or even hire you, mm-hmm. I mean, how's the best way to find you?
So they can find me on LinkedIn. On LinkedIn, I am Anthony P. Wachira. Or they can visit my website, and there are ways that they can send me an email from my website. My website is theinfluential.co.ke. That way, I'll be able to respond, and we can discuss what it is they need help with, and we can take it forward from there.
Well, I hope you meet some people, because the purpose of this podcast is to network, and I want to know people who I don't know. You know, and I want to know them because someone else that I know knows them. So any of these young people that you know that you think would be ideal for an interview, let's talk about that. That's great. So Tony, thank you very much for being here today, and it's been really fantastic, and appreciate it. And I'll see you soon. And everyone else, thank you for watching, and we'll see you down the road. Thank you. Bye-bye.